So I'm Peter, and I'm going to need to sit down for this one because I realized last month I got suckered into this beginning story, and I said, oh, I can do that. That's a lot of fun. And I realized that a story has sort of a beginning, middle, and end, but beginnings was, so I even got a little cheat sheet a little bit so I kind of stay on track. But I went through a mind journey. So this is really the story of my mind journey of this past month on the topic of beginnings and endings and a lot of other things, because it's not as simple as you think. But it is pretty playful. So at any rate, so the mind journey, one of the first things that came up with is, as a child of kind of formative years of the 60s, there was always those, they were these inspirational posters, it says life is what happens between birth and death. Some of you probably remember that, I mean, they're so insipidly obvious there, but that's, the beginning. And then the other one was, today is the beginning of the rest of your life. And you were supposed to wake up each day and remember that, and of course be inspired to do wonderful and active things. So starting with the 60s axioms that kind of put me in the mood on that, but I realized that beginnings, they're a lot more complex. I mean, they're cyclical, they start all over, they come in all kind of flavors. I mean, there's arbitrary beginnings and absurd beginnings. I mean, a calendar. Today, the new year is the beginning of a new year. January 1st, the beginning of a new year. What's the beginning? I mean, that's absurd, The people say the first day of spring, March 21st. Well, it's the equinox, but spring kind of starts when it starts, and it starts in different times and different places. So then there's vague and ambiguous beginnings. So, one of these things, I mean, I'm a geography nerd here, so it's like the source where the Mississippi River begins. Well, a river doesn't begin in one place. It kind of collects water from lots of places, So I mean, I realized this topic of beginnings got really loaded, and I got deeper and deeper into the ambiguity of all of this. And then there's things like, when does a day begin? Well, does a day begin at 12:01 a.m.? I mean, that's a.m. Does the day begin when the sun rises over the horizon? Or does the day begin when I wake up? I mean, you can kind of call it whatever you want. So, and then there's false beginnings too. You go on a trip and you're all started, and I've just begun my trip, and then you forgot something, you go home, and then you start all over again. You say, well, I've just begun my trip again. I mean, you've got this sense of beginning. So, at any rate, so that went on. So I said, okay, this is taking me nowhere. So then I thought, well, life stages are kind of a series of beginnings. I mean, it's kind of like acts of a play, and we're always beginning and ending things, and you've got so many. Sometimes you've got so many things you're beginning with that you sort of get so confused. It's like I've begun so many projects, and how many of you ended? Who's gotten into that situation, right? I've got a lot of things that I've begun and maybe not finished. But then I thought, well, the ultimate beginning, I guess, at least from my point of view, I guess you could think of birth. Okay, that's the beginning of your life, and some people would argue that we're moving spirits through whatever, but at any rate, so I would think of birth, but how many of us remember our birth? Well, but there is the Genesis story there, and as you kind of ask your mother at some point when you realize there's a birthing process, and you say, well, how was I born, or what happened when I was born? So there's the first story that you get passed on to you. You don't even know it, but it's a beginning story. And of course, mine was, my folks had been in the U.S. just over a year, and my brother was having a birthday party, and my mother was 8.5 months pregnant or whatever, and she said she got tired of playing bingo with these kids, and suddenly like, holy crap, I'm going to have a baby, So, and my father, of course, didn't have a driver's license yet, so she had to let the neighbor lady take her to the hospital, and they said, oh, no, you're not having this baby yet. So then, sure enough, she said, I'm having this baby, and 10 minutes after the elevator, I was born. So there's a story there, it's a beginning story that I didn't experience, but I guess it's about me. So then I thought, well, then what are all the other beginnings that I've had since? And you start getting into your memories, and, there's, well, the first day of school, that's the beginning. That's a real beginning, because at that point you start becoming institutionally socialized. I mean, that's what it was for me. And I said, oh, wow, I've never been the same. A beginning usually changes you. You don't go back after a beginning. Rarely can you undo something that gets done. So I thought of that one. And then I thought, well, another after that is like your first time away from home. You're overnight, Boy Scout camp. You're away. You're kind of in a different world. So that's kind of a beginning, and all kinds of things. I mean, you don't have to change your underwear every day. You're just kind of like the beginning of a new liberation of organizing your own life, So then I went through some others, and they said, well, then I thought, well, what about those formative years? You start getting your first kind of out of culture experience where you're in a place where things aren't the same way as they were. I went to Eastern Kentucky as a kid in high school. And then there's the first hot kiss at the school dance, I mean, that kind of is a beginning. That sort of starts a whole new series of kind of hormonal beginnings that you sort of never recover from, right? So then you kind of go, and then the first adult friendship, a friendship that you as a young person have with an adult. I thought that was a beginning. It's a whole different meaning of how to relate to people. Your first solo travel experience, your first hitchhike. Man, that's also kind of breaks a lot of innocence too, and you realize from now on, I know how to solve problems. I know how to rely on strangers or get myself out of a fix or to kind of judge things. So then, so you get into, and then of course, there's the classic ones of marriage where you embark on a life partnership. Well, that's a beginning that is something that you just hadn't done before. You're no longer out there in sort of a field of being able to pick and choose. And then, so then there's and then home ownership. Well, that's a beginning where suddenly these problems are all mine, not the landlord's. Okay, that's a beginning. I mean, from then on, you've got that one going. So now, and then you get to a point where retirement, and I say that is a beginning, and I've been known to say this is kind of a beginning. It's like a brand new career, and it's a time to sort of begin to make sense out of the world in a way. I mean, I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense out of it, and I call it a new career option, a new beginning. And you look at human nature and why do things get done? Why do things not get done? Yep, and I'm just about wrapped up. And so you go through that, but the aging process continues, kind of becomes what I like to call the beginning of the end. And there's a few old people kind of in their 90s that I check in with in the Meadows of Dan area. And they're at the beginning of the end, and they're not afraid to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room. And it's kind of fun to get into some real heart-to-heart chats about what endings are like. And of course, there's also the beginning is, so that's really kind of the beginning of that end. But then, and I think of the beginnings of the absurdity, because there was a question, I guess, a debate of whether beginnings could be new or not. And part of the aging process, of course, is the little bit the Swiss cheese brain. They call it senility, but it's where you start poking the needle through, and suddenly it hits an air hole, and you say, "Whoop! I just kind of lost that thread," and you kind of begin to find your brain again, right? It's like you go out to the garage to the freezer and say, "Wait, what did I come out here for? Well, let me go back." And I'll begin anew, and this time maybe I'll remember what I came out to pick up in the freezer, right? So, at any rate, so that's amusing on beginnings, and there's 7 minutes. So thank you, and this was a tough one. Okay.
Beauty before age.
So we wanted to share a few beginnings for us, and we thought we'd begin by talking about the first time we met, which I think is a pretty funny story. We were in Atlanta, downtown. We both lived downtown at the time. This was about 4 years ago. And there's a bar called Henry's, and I had signed up.
It's a restaurant.
It's a bar.
Restaurant.
I had signed up for the Women's Outdoor Network, which is basically kind of a code name for lesbians in Atlanta who like to kayak.
Lesbians who are looking for a mate.
So I went to Henry's that night. They have these big double doors at the entrance. And I went in through one of the double doors, and I'm looking straight ahead at the bar. And I see this woman, this beautiful woman, dressed in a dark black suit. And she's going like this. And it appears to be to me. And I kept looking on both sides, thinking, I don't know you. I mean, this is kind of weird. But she kept looking right at me, and she's doing this. So
Crystal was the best looking woman in that restaurant that evening. And I had to meet her. I couldn't think of a better way to do it. But to hail her over.
I think in hindsight, she was parked where she could see the door. And so she was just checking women out as they entered. And if she liked a woman, she would simply do this. So I went up to her, and I was kind of embarrassed not to. I went up to her, we started talking, and then she said, "How old are you?"
But we had talked about 10 minutes. But, you know, I think everybody's my age, you know, that I meet, you know, for the most part. But after about 10 minutes, I'm like, something's a little off here. She looks a little bit younger. How much younger? I didn't know.
So she said, "How old are you?" And gosh, how old was I at the time? 36?
36.
So I said 36, and she said, "Bye-bye." And I thought, man, this is the most forward person I have ever met in my life in so many ways. So I went out. I stayed in the restaurant, but continued to I started socializing with other people. And the night, we were there probably a couple of hours, and I kept kind of watching to see.
Wait. Before she walked off, okay, after I said bye-bye, she said, "Well, Jane, my last partner was 53. And then she walked off.
It was actually a lie. She was 52, but however. So I walked off, and I kind of kept an eye on her throughout the night, and it got later and later, and I noticed at one point that she was sitting at a table. I think you were by yourself, or maybe with one other person.
I was never by myself.
So I was getting ready to leave, and I walked over and I gave her my card. It was my author card at the time. And because I had had a stalker, I stopped putting my phone number on those cards. So it was a card, it had my name, it had the book I'd written, it had my email address. And it really didn't have much of anything else. And so I gave her the card, it was the only card I had, and I left. You're going to make me tell this part, aren't you?
Well, I'll just tell a little part. So I kept the card, and I went back to my condominium that night, and I was really excited to have it, but also she was just way too young, and I wasn't really looking for a friend, you know? So I lost it. I lost it that night, and I woke up the next morning, and I didn't even think about it. So 2 weeks later, I'm interested in getting to know her because she was very, very lovely and pretty, and I thought, well, I could use a friend. I don't necessarily have to have a girlfriend. So I couldn't find the card, and so then I got kind of desperate, and her name was Crystal Presley. So Presley's easy to remember, but the Crystal part, you know, it's not spelled like you would normally spell it, you know, because her parents were devout Christians, and so her name is Christal. But anyway, so I'm looking her up on, you know, on LinkedIn, I'm Googling, and I finally find her. So I send her some emails, and then I finally find her on Facebook. And I sent her this Facebook message, and you tell the next.
Well, I had hooked up with somebody else. I mean, she waited 2 weeks. Oh, God. So luckily, it didn't last very long. And so Jane and I went out after that as friends. So this was in February. And in May, we bought a house together. And we were anxiously awaiting, because in Georgia at the time, it was illegal for a woman to marry a woman. We could have come to Virginia and done that, and it would have been totally legal. But we knew we wanted to get married. We knew. I mean, it was only February, March, April, May. So it was 3 months. But when you know, right? And people used to tell that to me, and I had no idea what it meant, and I would get really upset when they would say it, because I had never had that experience before. But I knew very shortly after meeting Jane, the second time, that I wanted to be with her forever. So on June the 26th, 2015, we were sitting in our beautiful new house downtown, and one of our friends texted us, and we knew that the Supreme Court would be making a decision very shortly, but we had no idea. Nobody knew when it would be, only before the end of June.
Or what it would be.
Or what it would be. We had no idea.
Yeah.
So we had plans that if by the end of June the Supreme Court said, it's not going to be legal, same-sex marriage will not be legal federally, then we would go somewhere else and get married. But if they did, we would go the moment we heard. And Jane travels for a living. And so she was only home certain days of the week, and so she happened to be home. We were sitting at our table, and the announcement came. So we immediately went down in our pajamas. We were the first people to get married in Fulton County in Atlanta on the courthouse steps. And I must say, if we had had any idea we'd be all over CNN and Bloomberg, we would have dressed better.
And I would have brushed my hair instead of doing this,
Jane had a shirt on. What did it say?
All I want to do is drink wine and pet my dog.
But I'm glad we began, and I cannot imagine beginning or ending with anybody else.
Thank you.
Was a time of real enlightenment. It was in high school that I realized that I could earn a really good living as a drug dealer. Picture for yourself young teenage Clint sitting in the high school guidance counselor's office, very nervous. Dad's there. The question that everyone's dreading comes forward. So Clint, what do you want to do when you grow up? I don't know, like computers are kind of cool. Programming maybe? Huh, I always thought you'd be a pharmacist, chimes Dad. I look at Dad and say, pharmacist? Where did that come from? Well, as high school went on, I became very intrigued by the idea of pharmacy. The whole drug dealing idea, that was pretty prominent too, but pharmacy seemed like a much better option. I decided that I wanted to go off to school at the University of Michigan. Now, I came from a middle class family. At times, probably closer to being described as a lower middle class family. My dad was a custodian at the high school. Dad spent more years unemployed than employed because of budget cuts, millage challenges, things like that. So college was something my parents encouraged me to do, but there wasn't a lot of college fund to be taken advantage of. But fortunately, I had joined the National Guard, signed on that dotted line, wore the uniform proudly, and gladly took advantage of the GI Bill. So from the GI Bill, a small scholarship, a little bit of help from the family, working part-time while going to school, I managed to graduate from the University of Michigan only owing $11,000. My dad had taught me many things, but one of the things that he taught me was to plan the work and work the plan. After becoming a pharmacist, I quickly found myself working in hospitals and advanced up through the ranks to where I was in pharmacy administration. Now, the University of Michigan had prepared me very well for being a drug dealer. It hadn't prepared me so well for having to be in charge of other drug dealers. So I decided that I needed to go back to school to learn more about leadership and management. Started pursuing different master's programs, landed on Central Michigan University's program. They were one of the first pioneers of distance learning. Got a master's degree in administration with a focus in leadership. Best of all, with tuition reimbursement, I graduated after 5 years owing very little out of pocket. It was that pharmacy administration background that led me to being recruited by Curlian Clinic to take the role as a pharmacy operations manager at Roanoke Memorial Hospital. Now, in case you couldn't tell from my Midwest accent, or the fact that I went to 2 universities in Michigan, I'm not originally from Virginia. So we loaded up the family and moved from Michigan to Roanoke. After taking my new position at Roanoke, quickly found myself doing a lot with process improvement, project management, that type of thing. I had been exposed to a number of things in my master's degree, but one of them was Lean Six Sigma. Really learning a lot about quality and process improvement and how to manage projects. And I realized that I really needed to, or I wanted and needed to learn more about that. So I started looking at different Lean Six Sigma programs that I could attend. Found out that Villanova University had an online program. Better yet, I found out that Carillion would pay 100% of that online program. After 2 years, I completed my black belt certificate in Lean Six Sigma. While at Carillion, I also found out that they were starting a Toastmasters club. Now, I had heard about Toastmasters while I was getting my master's, but I really didn't know how to get involved with Toastmasters. But when I found out that Carillion was starting a club, I was one of the first people to sign up. Now, if you're not familiar with Toastmasters, it's a group of people, it's international, that helps you to become better with public speaking and leadership skills. First couple of years, I didn't do a whole lot with it. I just kind of sat back. I'd make a meeting if it was convenient, if I had time, but it wasn't a priority. Then I realized that if I didn't care about my own growth as a leader and as a communicator, chances are nobody else was going to either. And so I got serious about becoming better at public speaking and not being afraid of getting up in front of a group of people. Went on to pursue the Distinguished Toastmasters, which is the highest educational award that you can get in Toastmasters. I'm very pleased to say I got that in November of 2017. Through Toastmasters, though, I was introduced to this really unique form of standing up in front of a room full of people and talking. It's what brought all of you here tonight. It's storytelling. And while I don't mind getting up in front of a group of people and giving a presentation, I do it quite often. What I really love is getting up in front of a group of people and telling a story.
A motorcycle addict. Next to my family, there's nothing more important than motorcycles to me. This started in 1959. I was in the 9th grade in high school, and the guy in study hall said, "I have a motorcycle for sale." "How much?" $25. "Does it run?" "Yeah." He said, "But I don't have a title." "Not a problem, I don't have a license." So I snuck this motorcycle home, little 125cc, two-stroke, and kept it in my friend's garage. My mother abhorred motorcycles. I don't know what her experience had been. She never explained it, but she hated motorcycles. I lived 1 block from the Detroit City Nursery, where they used to raise trees to plant around the city of Detroit. So I had like a little bit of country right behind the house. So that's where I went over and learned how to fall down a lot and occasionally stay up. When you're trying to teach yourself something like that, it gets ugly. But anyhow, I did okay. As time went by, when I got my first job out of high school, my first paycheck, I brought home another motorcycle. My mom went berserk. She actually stood on the front porch, put her head down, and just pointed away from the house. So I knew where that was going. Well, then I went in the Army, 1965. Like a lot of veterans from World War II on, when they got out of the Army, motorcycles really appealed to you for that sense of adventure, sense of freedom, and they're loud. For some reason, you like loud when you've been a soldier. But anyhow, my loving wife, we got married while I was in the Army. She wanted me to get a motorcycle. I had just started a job. I had no credit. I just got out of the Army. I had no money. I needed a motorcycle bad. So we went to the bank and told them we needed to buy a new washer and dryer. And being sympathetic for the fact that I was a veteran and I had just started my job, they give us the loan for $500, which I immediately went out and bought a shiny BSA motorcycle, 2 years old. Shortly thereafter, I joined a motorcycle club in Detroit, which isn't as crazy as watching Sons of Anarchy, but isn't too far off from that. And so on it continued. And over the years, kept buying, selling. I work on motorcycles. I don't have any money, but I can work on things and create something of some value and work my way up. And it had occurred to me that from this beginning, the adventures that have taken place in my life that would have never happened had I not riding motorcycles. The people, the places. When you travel by motorcycle, you no longer, the watch is useless. You eat when you're hungry. You stop when it gets dark. When it rains, you find the nearest overhang. It can be a bank teller window. It could be a gas station. I've been in more than one party that started under a bridge, up in that little triangular place that you hide when there's a terrible storm. Pretty soon more bikes are pulling in, and out come the wine bottles and the herbal supplements. And you have a party. And I'm sure people driving by are thinking how terrible it is that we had to hide under a bridge from the rain. But they're all wonderful experiences. There's sort of a balance between terror and joy there. When you're riding motorcycles, it's either wonderful or terrible. There's not a lot of middle ground. And there's no minor accidents on motorcycles. In one accident, I had 5 broken bones, 14 bandages on me from one wreck. Which I thought, well, if it scares me to get on a bike again, I'm done. I don't have to prove anything. Well, this year is my 60th year riding. I'm over 80 motorcycles. 7 years ago, I had 2 strokes. And of course, being on warfarin, my doctor said, you can't crash, you're going to die. He said, if you hit your head, you're going to have an aneurysm. If you get cut, you're going to bleed out. You can't ride. So I quit for a year. And the turning point was my youngest son. He said, Dad, you look like you're waiting around to die. And that hit home. And I thought, that I am, in all honesty. So I got another motorcycle. In that 7 years, I am now on my 13th motorcycle. Some I've kept for a very short time and went, I don't like this, and got rid of it. But I've turned into sort of a frenzy to get done the things I wanted to get done before I'm done with this sport. And it all started with a $25 illegal motorcycle.
Part of it was recognizing, beginning what, you know? I mean, yeah, as has been said, there's many beginnings and the way we interpret it. So what came to my mind that I felt like I'd share, and who knows how it'll evolve, but part of my beginning, the important thing of beginning, I went back to beginning my life. And yeah, I don't remember when I was born, but I do know that part of what shaped me for who I am today is growing up. I was number 4 girl of 4 girls, and my mother did confess to me in the later years of her life that she felt guilty because when I was born a girl, she was really disappointed because she really wanted a boy. However, that led her to letting me be the tomboy that I was. And I'm very thankful because back in that day, and so this was early 50s when I was running around in this little town in Connecticut, my best friends were boys. And my first, when we finally got a little black and white TV, and my first show that I even looked at was The Lone Ranger, and Tonto was my hero. And riding horses, and I learned how to make bows and arrows out of forsythia bushes, and we'd run around, and then, and this is something I share with young people today who are clueless about this, when I went to school I had to wear dresses, and I hated dresses, you know, and our dad was a minister and we had to dress perfectly for church and do this and that. My mom permed our hair for all the special occasions. I hated it. I just wanted to wear my pants, and she let me wear little kid jeans that they had back then. However, when I went to school and we had to wear dresses, the boys stopped playing with me because I was a girl and you weren't supposed to play with girls. And that hurt really deeply in a way that I think finally, maybe now in our culture, we're starting to open up to that kind of, no, we're all everything. And so anyways, I realized going through school, and I did figure out how to play ball and play soccer and do things with a skirt on, so I could get away with that. And the teachers actually let me get away with it, thank goodness. And then we get into high school, teenage world, and by then, you know, you're supposed to be dating. And I just wanted to be friends with guys and girls. I mean, I just wanted to be friends. I wasn't into that sexual world at all. And that was, again, back then, especially as you became 15, 16 years old, you were supposed to date and maybe even kiss a guy or something, and I just wasn't drawn. But then I go to a church camp, and this is upstate New York, and it was fun because actually, at that time, we started talking about the civil rights movement, the peace movement. We were talking about things that really opened me up to the world. And what was very cool was that there was a whole, probably a third of the kids in this church camp were from Harlem, New York, and they were black. And I realized then that was my first real hands-on experience with black-skinned people. Just recently, my daughter has accused me of being racist in the other direction, because I love black skin. I just think it's so much more. Black and brown, you know, Native Americans and African Americans, they're all just much more drawing to me, fascinating-wise and looks-wise. So anyways, we're all hanging out and we're talking about these incredible, meaningful talks about Martin Luther King and the times, and it just opened up my heart in a way that became the beginning of my recognizing not only all our connections regardless of our race or anything, but male or female, it didn't matter. And I was particularly drawn to this one boy who was from Harlem, and he had just this beautiful, rich, black skin and incredible hair. I just loved his hair. And those big, beautiful eyes. And by the end of the camping days, church camp days, it wasn't camping, but you know what they called it, we were getting ready to all go home. And he brought me to the little place where us girls were staying, and he gave me a kiss. And it was the most amazing experience for me, because I had never been kissed like that. And it opened up the world to me. And from then on, and then he goes down to Harlem, and I go to my little town in upstate New York, and I actually started to date some very special boys through the rest of my teenage years. But that was the beginning of recognizing a different kind of way of being with guys that I hadn't, even though the culture was pushing, 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 it had no meaning to me until he actually touched me in such a gentle, sweet way that it began a whole new part of my life. So that's my story.
Well, hello, everyone. Hello. So I was one of those people who was feeling I don't think guilt is the right word, but I had a sense of, okay, here I am. I've come to this room a couple of times, and people have gifted me with stories, and I have come here kind of for this great little gathering, this intimate gathering, expecting like, something wonderful is going to happen today, and maybe Hari's daughter is going to tell a wonderful story, and I'll laugh and probably be moved to tears. And, you know, hearing that, well, the basket is not full of names. Like, well, oh, we all have stories, you know? We all have stories, and I think that I thought a little bit before I put my name in. I thought, well, what could I say? And no, I like tapped I was like, Emily, don't think about what you're going to say. Listen to the story that's being told. And it was you. What is your name? The black cat?
Right.
Yeah, you were telling your story, and then I sort of was jolted back into your story, and I heard you saying, you know, after being in the war, you like noise. One, you know, you were talking about your motorcycle, but I was thinking that even that simple phrase in and of itself could be expanded into a vast world of story. I mean, there's a lot to contemplate there. I'm very new to Floyd. Very new. I moved here 2 years and about 5 months ago with my husband. And how does that apply? I used to sit at the dinner table in Arizona where I lived with my family. And if I tried to speak and tell a story or relate an experience of my day, my older brother would go, like, all right, you know, come on, get on with it. And then when I was 9, I made a choice. I thought to myself, I'm just not going to speak anymore. I just won't, because why go to all that trouble of trying to get a word in edgewise? You know, why? I mean, life is really interesting. I don't need to talk about it, and I certainly don't need to do what my little brother does, to like make a show every evening at the dinner table. So I did. I stopped talking. If people spoke to me, I answered them. And of course, I had a couple of really close friends. The through line, you know, I took a drama class when I was helping my sister raise her children in the Bay Area in California. And with this master storyteller who has since passed away, and she kept talking about this thing called this through line. And so I'm I guess doing right now with this spontaneous storytelling, and someone might say, well, where's your through line? It's there somewhere, right? It's there. I haven't identified it. I didn't practice. But if all of us could show up on the spot in every moment, believing that all of our through lines are connected and that everyone has one, we could make some miraculous movement on this planet. And coming to Virginia has been, I think, hands down, the most difficult thing I've ever done. I mean, it's like a different planet from where living in the Bay Area, being raised in the Southwest. But on the other hand, the people that I've met here, I mean, and granted, I get that pass with my sex and my gender, my skin tone. You know, I can knock on a neighbor's door and they're not, I'm confident that I can knock on a neighbor's door and be accepted. But one of the greatest gifts about being here is, one of the greatest gifts about being here is watching, I would say, particularly elders in this community who stop and take time for that through line. So I was sitting in the chair thinking, yeah, everybody has a story. This is the most fascinating thing, and it's also a revolutionary act to gather, no screens, and speak your truth and listen to other people's truths. And then imagine this convergence of through lines and heart space where we're all saying no for the evening to a screen. We're saying no to the worst news of the evening that will be forgotten tomorrow. We're saying yes to what is common in all of our experiences, because we all share the same life on our individual paths. So thank you to Floyd County, thank you to all of you who get up and courageously share, and thank you, Virginia, for your farmers who I think really kind of set the tone. We see their cattle, we see their round bales, we see the paths before they become round bales. And you can take any one of those simple components and trace it back. We all know, right, that in each instant there's this gigantic, momentous, evolving story, like one of those round bales. But those round bales are composed of all of these little pieces of straw which come from one seed and then another seed, and so humanity is wonderful. And even though you all don't speak Spanish, I'm sure you speak many different languages, but you're not I had to really get over that. But nobody's brown, and nobody's speaking Spanish, and nobody's Tohono O'odham, and it doesn't matter. Really? Hit me with a 2x4 a few more times, God, because this is where we are on planet Earth. So thank you.
Well, this has been one of the most fun things I've done in a while. I think one of the really interesting things that she was touching on is how we communicate. And I was listening to an NPR piece this morning about the Cherokee Nation down in North Carolina. There's a lot of head bobs about how their spoken language is being lost. And what I think that Appalachia has is that we have storytelling. And so this is a really special thing. I get weirdly emotional when I start drinking. So I don't know. Some people like to start fights and other weird stuff in bars, but I just get super emotional. It's let's just hug it out. But the story that I'll tell about new beginnings or beginnings, my dad gets to tell all the time, and this is the first time I get to tell it because he's not here. So, and he's a defense attorney down in Abingdon, focusing on poverty law in Southwest Virginia. And his biggest trick to public speaking is, as an attorney, is that if you don't know what to talk about, just talk until you know what to talk about. And then maybe in the course of that, you can find out what to talk about. And coincidentally, my background's in landscape architecture from Virginia Tech, and I had a design professor that said, well, because you have the blank page syndrome as writers and designers, and so you don't really know what to do, and so it's like, just draw what you know. And in the course of drawing what you know, something will come to be. Maybe that's with writing. It's just like, if all that you know is the shape of something, just draw it. Just write about it. Just talk about it. And in the course of it, maybe a story will happen. So with a little bit of luck and a little bit of courage, we'll find somewhere and maybe there's a beginning somewhere along that. But when I was probably 16, 17 years old, just starting to drive, is that I had grown up in a household where I was the middle child of 5, and so I had enough guidance to not be out of line all the time, but I had enough leeway to be creative. The other half of the precursor to the story is that I was also in the Boy Scouts. And so as a Boy Scout, they're always encouraging you to think creatively, and there was one merit badge that happened to be on, I think, business management or money management, and so a component of that was talking about entrepreneurship. And so there are these, and then the third piece is me, of how I came to be, and that I was always interested in outdoor recreation and the natural environment and design. And so when those collided, is that as part of the Boy Scouts merit badge is that you had to create a fake business plan. The fake business plan turned into a real business plan, and before I could even drive, I decided that I wanted to cut yards. I wanted to make money for going to the movies or whatever that might be. So I opened up a mowing business, and I first started out driving the mower with a little utility cart going around to my neighbors, and I was like, well, whoever's cutting your yard, I'll beat them by 20% because I didn't have insurance to pay, I had no equipment, and so I went around cutting yards for $15, $20 a piece. So so that ended up growing into being able to taking the push mower and then buying the riding mower, the yard cart, and then that kind of ballooned into buying my own trailer, just a little 5x8, no nothing thing, load everything up, and now, after I got my driver's license, I can go across town. So now, after high school, or after high school let out in the evenings, I would go and I would cut yards for, a few hours, and make a little pocket change. Meanwhile, is that I had these things. Simple pair of glasses. Well, what I thought was a simple pair of glasses. As a child, I was born with what they call amblyopia, which was an early stage of lazy eye, where my brain favors one side or the other. And I'd always been battling that for a while, of being strongly left eye dominant. The world thought that I needed to be, both eyes. And so I'm going to borrow a couple extra minutes, but so as a new business owner and a new glasses wearer, is that I went to the eye doctor, got a pair of glasses, had no concept of money, and my mom said, well, I can't go to you to the optometrist, just pick out whatever pair of glasses that we need, we'll get you squared away. So I come back, she looks at the bill, and she says, what in the world is wrong with you? Picked out one of the most expensive pairs of glasses, go on my first job with the mower. I'm going across town. It was a warm spring day, enough to where I had a hoodie on, and my glasses started to fog up on me, and I had a Nissan Pathfinder with the rear wheel that goes on the back of the thing, and so So I was getting really annoyed because I hadn't kind of gotten used to the benefits of glasses, like, hey, you can see, but you also have to take them off periodically. So I take them off, and instead of putting them in the fancy case, I set them delicately on the spare tire. So I get to my job, and I drive about a mile away, and I was really excited. So I get on the mower, and I'm backing up, I get off the trailer, and I'm about to start the yard, and I'm like thinking, oh, what's going to be new? Well, the yard's going to be so much clearer. I'll be able to see my grass cut that much better if I had glasses. And I was overwhelmed with this just defeat of my mom is going to wring me out because my glasses are no longer on the back of my car and they're not on my face. And I'm a mile away. And so I was like, okay, so in absolute panic, I unload the mower, and this is a mile away, and I drive all the way back to the house. I'm looking in the pavement, and my parents' driveway is a little steep, and so I drive up to the top of it, and there's no glasses ever to be found on this whole entire drive. I was like, melting. My mom is going to wring my neck. That's the only thing that's going to happen. So I go back to the job site, and I take every turn wide, as if I had the trailer because I had dropped it off. And so I get to where I'm going, no glasses, and this is like an hour long, and so I drive really slowly back to the car. And so I get back to my parents' driveway, and I said, I don't even know what to do right now. So I go inside, and I find one of those pair of neon sunglasses that you get at festivals. You get these things all over the place, right? And so I find these pair of sunglasses, I break them out of the wrapper, and I put them right on the tire carrier. And so then I go and I drive my path to the job site, taking the same exact route, same sweeping wide for your corner so that you don't curb hop the trailer. And I'm looking in my rearview mirror at those neon sunglasses, just waiting. And I get to the county line in between Washington County and Abington town limits, and there's a pavement difference, right? Because they separate out their contracts. And so I hit that thing, and I'm watching, and I feel the thump, and I look in the back, and all of a sudden, those sunglasses go flying off. I was like, oh, that's it! And so I pull over, right in the middle of traffic, pull over into the grass, and I go, and I find those sunglasses, and they're sitting right there, and I swear, within about 6 inches, I find those glasses. And what I learned, I began to understand the value of tell your mom the bad news after it's been resolved. And I began to take care of my things, including glasses.
All right, I wasn't really prepared to do this at all, but I have a good story and I keep thinking about it. And I haven't thought about it in years, and I don't even know if I remember exactly how it goes. Does anybody here know what holy water is? A lot of people. Okay. Well, I was raised Catholic in a big family of 9 siblings in the South Shore of Boston. My father died in 2005, and I live in Virginia. The rest of the family still lives there. And I had been visiting him right before he died, and my mother was splashing holy water on him. So he died, and then a few years later, my mother's health began to decline. And we took turns taking care of her. And I used to go up maybe, once a year for 2 to 3 weeks and relieve my other family members and care for my mother. And it was during one of these trips, and we were trying as a family to find my dad's military records so we could apply for some more support for my mother. But nobody knew where they were. So that was a component in there. So whenever I went home after my dad died, I stayed in his bedroom. I loved to be in his bedroom. It was the same as when he was there. all the things were there, his tapes and his pictures and everything. So one morning I'm getting up and I'm getting dressed and I'm walking across the floor and I hear a sound like a propeller, like something whirring. So I'm looking around, trying to find where the sound's coming from, following it with my ear. Finally, I noticed that on the dresser, the holy water bottle that my mom used when my dad was dying was vibrating. And I have to inject here that the reason this story is about beginning, is that the theme? Was because it was maybe the beginning of me not being the biggest skeptic in my family. My whole family, you know, numbers mean everything, angels, and I'm always like the skeptic. Not that I don't believe in that stuff, I'm just not sure. I'm open to it. So anyways, this was about not being such a skeptic. So I see the water bottle, holy water bottle, vibrating. And I have a scientific mind. I'm trying to figure out how it's doing that. I'm studying it and everything. I can't figure it out. So I just felt like an overwhelming feeling of my dad in the room, you know, and just like, hey, Dad. You know, a little pat on the back from him or something. So then, you know, I set it back in place and, well, that was cool. I start finishing getting dressed. And all of a sudden, I hear another vibrating sound. At first, I thought it was a fan, and it was in one of the cupboards, and I couldn't see it. I mean, it was really distinct. So now I'm hearing it again. And I look, and the bottle is not shaking. So it's like coming from somewhere else. So I'm looking around, following it with my ear. And then I see behind a picture on the same dresser is another holy water bottle that's vibrating. It's a plastic bottle, and they both had about that much holy water in them. And so now it's like I cannot deny what's going on here. You know, like, Dad, what the heck are you doing? And I just got washed over with the feeling of him. And the feeling was I had seen my brother earlier who was an alcoholic, who was estranged from the family, and we had a wonderful heart connection earlier in the day. And I felt like my dad was saying, good job with Johnny, you know, and you're doing the best you can and all of that, pat on the back. But I was like elated. All right, so then that happened. Some of my siblings came over the house, and I ended up retelling the story, all animated. They're all excited about it. They love this kind of story. And, you know, I'm not playing the skeptic now. And, you know, they all believe 100% that my dad was contacting me. So I'm telling the story, and then I decide to go out for a bike ride because I'm being relieved from caregiving. So my sister Sherry's going to stay in the house. So I go out for a bike ride. It's right on the ocean, beautiful ride. And my sister Sherry decides she's going to go up in the room to spend some time there to see what she feels, like something would happen to her. So she goes up in the room, and I come back, and she tells me, Colleen, you're not going to believe what happened. I went up there. I wanted to hear the water bottle shake. She said, nothing shook, nothing was happening. I was really disappointed. Then she said, right under the holy water bottle, I decided to open the drawer. She opened the drawer, and the first thing on the very top stack of papers was my dad's military records that we had been looking for. So that's that. Thank you.
Well, Colleen was brave enough to tell her dad's story. So I said, well, if you tell your dad's story, I'll tell a story of my dad. And I may get emotional telling the story. I haven't been drinking, but it's a story of my, I just get emotional anyway. I don't need to drink. Yeah, so this is about a new beginning. It was Labor Day weekend, 1995. And my dad was down here visiting me in Floyd. Colleen and the boys had gone back up to Massachusetts for a family reunion up there. And my dad had been a little bit ill, so he had retired, and I had been on the other side of the country, and I called him up just to say, hey, Dad, I'm not quite sure why. And he went, oh, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in Washington. Oh, great, because I grew up in a suburb of Washington, D.C. in Maryland. And he said, oh, great, why don't you come and get me? I'd love to visit with you and maybe go back down to your place. And I said, oh, well, Dad, I'm not in Washington, D.C., I'm in Washington State. He says, oh, okay. But something about that just really moved me, and I thought, well, maybe that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and pick him up and bring him down. These mountains here were really special to my dad. He grew up in Germany, and the region in Germany where he was from were rolling hills just like this. When I went over there to visit my grandparents and spend some time walking the mountains with my grandfather, the mountain ranges there are just like here, rolling mountains one after another, and blue. There's that same blue tint in the fog. So my father, when he first came down here with me when I first came to look at Floyd to see if I was going to move here, he had driven me down, and he took a fondness to it ever since. So anyway, he wanted to come here, so I was in Washington State. I decided I'm going to go ahead and change my plans. Instead of spending another week out there with friends that I was visiting, I decide I'm going to leave in the morning. I get up in the morning. I play in my alumni soccer game at the college, and then I start driving, and I pretty much drive straight 3 days directly back across the country, just because not like I felt some urgency or any angel thing happening. I just was like, when I drive, I like to drive, so I decide I'm going straight. And I even stop and I pick up a hitchhiker at one point so that we can like trade off and sleep a little bit, and we make it in like 3 days straight. We make it all the way across. So I come in, I see my dad, we visit a little bit, and maybe it's then that he says, oh, I want to come down and visit you in the mountains. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I hadn't been home in maybe a couple of months. That was the summer I spent out west. So I come back home, I visit with Colleen and the boys, and then they leave and head up to Massachusetts. And then I leave to drive back up and pick up my dad from D.C. and bring him back down here. So we're visiting, and we're going around. He's telling me stories that I've never heard before. He grew up in Germany during the war, and he's telling me these stories of things that he witnessed that happened. A bomb fell on their house. He witnessed one of his cousins being shot. I mean, all these things that he'd never even told my mom, and it was kind of an interesting thing to have that happen. I'm one of 9 siblings, and so none of these stories that have been told to my siblings, to my own mother, and he's sharing these things with me. But he's also in a lot of pain with the illness that he's having. He had congestive heart failure, so his lungs he couldn't process all the fluids in his body, so they were just like building up in his legs. And at night, he would call out, "Take me, Jesus!" He was just in a lot of pain. One of the evenings, I was giving him a massage, trying to, just help him with that, and he starts talking about, hey, you know what? I'm just beginning to figure out how to eat. All his life he'd struggled with being too heavy and trying this diet, trying that diet, and he was somebody who was very regimented, being German. He would put all his meals in these special little tubs, and we'd figure out a way to organize it enough so he wouldn't overeat. Anyway, so he's telling me, I've just figured it out. I finally figured out how to do it. If I do it in this way, and I eat this type of food and in this way, then I'm okay, and it's really working for me. And I'm like, well, that's great, Dad. I'm really glad, that's that beginning for him, that sense of hope, even still. And well, what I didn't know was that my dad he passed away that night in his sleep. And it was both, you know, when I woke up in the morning and, you know, I don't know that he has a DNR, do not resuscitate thing, and I start trying to do CPR, and then I realized it's too late, he's gone. And so while it was both a traumatic experience for me, it was also, as I had time to reflect and really be with it, one of the most grace-filled moments of my life, that he gifted me with his passing experience. That, I mean, I don't know that he knew that, but I mean, I received the gift of it. And in that motivation that he had to have a new beginning at that age of his life, that really sparked something in me for a new beginning. And because I have also struggled quite a bit in my life with eating and overeating, and, you know, being addicted to food, sugar in particular. And I was like, well, you know, I can't wait till it's too late if I'm going to, you know, try to be healthier. And I began to, you know, really begin to work on that in new ways. I don't know if that's when I started to go to counseling myself, but I did go to counseling. I also learned new practices for health and mental health. And one of the things about it being a new beginning for me was I began to volunteer at hospice. I began to, a few years later, go back to college myself to get a master's degree in counseling, and began to see that there are ways in which I could live a good, healthy life for as long as I had. 'Cause my dad was only 63. And I'm getting close to that now. And it's interesting for me now is that I've done a lot of things where I've had a lot of new beginnings and started new things. But what I feel like is happening for me now is I'm beginning to live into the middle of things. I really liked Emily shared that thing about the through line and the through story. And I'm really beginning to relax more into, I don't know how much time I have, but I know that the quality of how I live and how I relate is what's important. And you know, death has a way of framing the value of life and living for us all. And I feel like I'm in the beginning stage of really living a life that I'm proud of. Thanks for letting me tell the story.
Put my name in after Crystal said 3 or 4 times we need more names, and then when it got 7 o'clock I thought, phew. But anyway, I'm new at this, so I'll give it a shot, and I don't like to sit, so I'll stand. I think this story all started with a blue piñata. You know, in December we had about 16 inches of snow. I lived way out in the wilderness in Meadows of Dan, deep in the woods, and it was so deep I couldn't walk. And I'm used to walking every day. So my husband and I went to Christiansburg to do some errands, and so I said to him, well, while you go do such and such, I'm going to walk. And so I went in New River Valley Mall, and you know, on the end where there's not many stores and there are usually not many people. So I'm walking around. I'm so excited to be finally walking again. And I go around this, make a turn on one corridor, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this blue piñata, and I think, what the heck? What is this? But I'm walking, right? I haven't been able to walk, so I'm just cutting on through there. I'm not stopping to look. I'm just walking on around. And the next time I came back, and I thought, I'm just going to take a quick look. So I look over, and I don't stop walking because, you know, I really need this walk. I look over, and it's a blue piñata. It's a giant blue piñata. It looks like it might be a horse or a chicken or something. I don't know what it is. But it's a big piñata, but I don't want to stop. I'm walking. You know, this is my chance to walk without a foot of snow, 16 inches of snow, so I'm walking on around. And it's a big mall if you've ever been in there. I go in there and walk sometimes when I'm in Christiansburg. I mean, it's a long way around. I went down all the corridors, and I'm going all around. And so before I got back to the next place where I was going to think about stopping to look at this piñata, my cell phone rings. It's my husband. He's in the parking lot. He's finished his errand early. So I said, oh, okay. He says, well, you know, take your time. No. So I head on straight back, and I don't see the piñata again. And it's forgotten. I forgot all about this blue piñata until about maybe a couple of weeks later. I was getting ready to go to a holiday party, and I thought, you know, I've got to find something. I want something. It's Christmas, right? It's a holiday. I want something cheerful. I want to wear a red sweater. So I get out my red sweater that I love, and it is so shoddy. It really looks awful. And I mean, it's, you know, as I said, I live out in the wilderness, and number one, I hate to shop, which is why I wasn't shopping, which is why I was walking in the mall. And number two, I don't like computers, and I don't like ordering things online. So I'm in real trouble, as a friend of mine is, who's in this audience, who doesn't like to shop and doesn't like to order online. And so I thought, well, look, I looked in my closet, and I saw this other red sweater. It's kind of orangish red, really ugly sweater. But I've never liked that sweater. And it's in excellent condition. And the reason is because I don't like it, so I don't wear it. I'm not even sure why I bought it. It must have probably been on some huge sale, and I must have seen it and knew I needed a red sweater, and I thought, this will do until I can really find a red sweater that I like. So anyway, so I get the sweater out, and I think, oh, okay, let's see what I can do with that. And so I look in my closet, and I find a scarf, and I find this really bright, colorful scarf, multicolored scarf. And I put that scarf on, and I look in the mirror, and I think, oh my God, I look like a piñata. I look like a holiday piñata. And I thought, this is perfect. This is what I'm wearing to this holiday party. Okay, so, but by the time we got ready to leave, I started having second thoughts. I thought, what if this is not a piñata type party? This might be, you know, something else. So I thought, you know, I better tone this down. And so I did. And you might say, well, how would you tone down something? And my answer is always, as my friends know, a scarf. So I got a different scarf. It was more subdued. And I toned it down, and we went to this party. And when we got in, I looked around, and I thought, the women there were all in festive clothes, but they were, you know, had a little bling and a little glitter. And I looked around, no piñata looks at all. So I thought, oh, thank goodness I didn't do my full-fledged piñata. You know, I've kind of subdued it a little bit because obviously this was not the dress code of the night. So, but anyway, I kind of thought, well, it's all right. You know, I've toned it down, and I'm, you know, I'm looking around, and I'm listening, and I don't hear any, psst, look at the piñata. I don't hear anything like that. So I think, you know, I'm safe. You know, this didn't turn out so badly after all. But then after I got home the next day, I started thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the funnier it got. And I thought it was the funniest thing I could think of. And I thought, well, this is hilarious. You know, I should have gone with the piñata look. And then I started laughing about that, and then I started thinking about humor and how much I laugh, and my sense of humor has always been a barometer of my mental health. And then I went back, and I remembered, I went way back in time, and I remembered when my daughter was a child, just a little girl in elementary school. She's 39 now. And she came home from school one day, and she was telling me about a class assignment they had. And I think it had something to do with maybe, I don't know if it was pilgrims, Native Americans. I don't know. It was about customs and culture and where they lived, and they had done maps. They were doing things like that. And the assignment had been to create a legend. And so she had written a story, or probably a really pretty good story. But when she turned it in, she found out from the teacher that the legend was supposed to be a legend for the map, not a story. And so she's telling me this, and I just kind of like hold my breath, and I'm thinking, I wonder how she responded. I mean, how did this child feel when she found that she'd done the wrong thing? And before I could finish processing that, she just burst out laughing. She thought it was the funniest thing in the world, that she had confused the legend with a story. And I remember thinking at that time, she will be okay in this lifetime. She will have a happy life because she does not take herself seriously, and she can find some humor. And I started thinking, you know, I think I need to add a little more humor in my life. So then I started noticing between that time and this time, some things that normally might have irritated me or been frustrating, I found extremely funny. Well, there is no time to tell you all of these, and one of the people involved in one of these is right here in this room, so I won't tell you about the car trip with Sharon Parker and how funny that was. I've started noticing that, and things are funnier to me than they used to be. And in case you're wondering if I've forgotten the topic for tonight, I have not. I know that it's beginnings, and so tonight, January 5th, is it January 5th, is the beginning of my year of laughter. And so I plan whenever possible to laugh never at you or at others, but always with you. And so hopefully it'll be a long year of laughter. And also, in case you're wondering, this is my piñata sweater and scarf. I did wear it.
But we're always here the first Saturday of every month at the same place, same time. So we're 5:30 to 7 p.m. And the theme is simply this: secrets.
That is a good one.
So please come with all your secrets. Interpret that however you would like. Also, please like us on Facebook. And if you've enjoyed what you've seen tonight, please review us on Facebook, because your reviews really matter when people see this event and when they're thinking about what they'd like to do on a Saturday night. Yes. So thank you so much.